When your grown child says, "Mom, you deserve this," I used to believe there was nothing nicer. Only 5 words. But they made up for every restless night, every meal I missed, and every year I spent prioritizing other people. Therefore, I didn't have any doubts when my son Ethan contacted me from his Chicago office and said, "Mom, you deserve this." I didn't inquire as to why he felt the need to travel to Kyoto to commemorate my 72nd birthday. I had long buried my ambition of viewing the cherry blossoms in Japan behind broken appliances and debts, so I didn't wonder how he remembered it. I simply grinned and muttered, "You mean it?" He chuckled, and I believed him when he added, "Of course, Mom. It's time someone took care of you for once." I was trimming the rose bushes around my small lake property in Minnesota when I received that phone call. The frost was still sticking to the ground in late March. However, I recall how my heart blossomed at that very instant. "I've already booked the flights," Ethan said. "Mom, business class. You'll be surprised at how cozy it is." I sat down on the porch steps, let the sunlight warm my cheeks, and wiped my hands on my gardening apron. I said aloud to no one, "Kyoto." The only people who saw how much it meant to me were the sparrows who were jumping about my bird feeder. It had been decades since I had left the nation. It had been more than a year since I had left Minnesota. Nevertheless, my son was organizing a once-in-a-lifetime vacation specifically for me. I got into full planning gear during the course of the next week. I didn't have to. Ethan promised to take care of everything, but old habits don't go away easily. I found the suitcase I hadn't used since Ethan graduated from college. I meticulously arranged my scarves, aired out my shirts, and even purchased fresh compression socks as a precaution. I sprayed my neck pillow with lavender as if it were a fortunate charm. I even bought 2 small presents for my grandchildren when I went to the bookshop: an illustrated book on Japanese temples and handmade bookmarks. I smiled quietly as I put them in my purse. It seemed as though all of my efforts, the silent sacrifices, the lonely holidays, the overtime shifts, were finally being reciprocated in a single, lovely act. During the week, my sister gave me a call to see how I was doing. "Ethan still has a ton of work, doesn't he?" she inquired. Even she seemed startled that he was taking time off, so I chuckled. I informed her that he would be working remotely during our visit. However, the vacation is all for me. He recalled my childhood conversations about Kyoto. The person on the other end paused. "At last," she murmured. "Perhaps he's maturing." And I concurred. Perhaps he was. Ethan traveled into town to join me for dinner the day before the vacation. Just the 2 of us were to celebrate my birthday, and I had booked a table at a quaint Italian restaurant that I adored. However, Ethan abruptly altered the plan. "I have a spot reserved," he said. "Excellent evaluations for a modern location." We arrived to a modern, glass and metal restaurant in the heart of the city, chilly and vacant. His spouse was unable to attend. The children attended a recital. He seldom took his eyes off his phone. He once said that I looked like a lucky coin when I wore the green shirt. He was unaware. I made an effort to break the ice by asking him whether he was excited and if he had any locations he would want to see. Still staring at his phone, he mumbled, "It's your trip, Mom." He muttered, "Work call," as he got up halfway through the dinner. He vanished for over 2 hours. Trying not to feel like a placeholder, I sat there by myself, drinking tepid tea. He pretended nothing had occurred when he eventually came back. The bill was paid by me. I asked him to print the flight schedule and hotel reservation for me when I got home in case my phone's battery expired while I was traveling. "Mom, everything is digital now," he added. "Calm down, I've got it." I dismissed it as a sign of generational differences, even though it should have been a warning sign. I told myself that even if Ethan was under a lot of stress and had a lot on his plate, this was still a kind gesture. I had a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window that night to watch the moon reflect off the lake. He's changing, he really is, I said, and I allowed myself to think that perhaps I hadn't been a bad parent after all, for the first time in years. Now, I would have laughed if you had told me at the time that this would be the beginning of a narrative of revenge. I wasn't a combatant. I was a mother. I didn't think retaliation was possible. I supported forgiveness, grace, and allowing others the opportunity to grow. However, grace can occasionally be confused with weakness. Additionally, some people just get more adept at concealing their true motivations rather than maturing. In retrospect, the week seemed like a farewell show. Before the curtain came down and I understood that Ethan wasn't taking me to Kyoto to create memories, I wanted to say one more lullaby. He wasn't throwing a party. He was sending me out. He was setting a trap. And I walked right into it. By the time we got to the airport, the silence between us was thick enough to choke on. Ethan barely spoke during the car ride. His eyes stayed glued to the screen, thumbs dancing nonstop. I sat beside him, fingers fidgeting with the hem of my cardigan, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. The morning had started strangely. He rushed through breakfast, barely touched his eggs. I tried to lighten the mood with an old story about his dad, something funny about the time James got lost hiking and blamed the compass. Ethan barely reacted. Just a flat, huh? And back to tapping on his phone. "I'm just tired, Mom," he said when I finally asked. "Work stuff, don't worry." But I did worry. At the airport curb, he popped the trunk, handed me my suitcase, and said, "Text when you land." No hug, no photo, not even a smile. He didn't walk me in, just drove off like it was another Monday. I stood there with my suitcase handle in one hand and my passport in the other, watching his car disappear into the crowd. I told myself not to read into it. He'd been stressed. He always got like this before big projects, but there was a lump in my throat that wouldn't go away. It was my birthday, and it felt like a chore to him. Inside the terminal, I checked in and went through security with plenty of time. Still, I kept thinking about that awkward dinner the night before. The restaurant was cold, not just in temperature, but in soul. The walls were all steel and glass. No warmth, no music. He said it had great Yelp reviews, but it felt like a place designed to make you eat quickly and leave. He didn't even look up when I walked in. I wore the green blouse he used to say made me look like a lucky penny. Back when he was in middle school, he'd reach for that blouse on laundry day, press it against his cheek, and say, "Smells like home." I doubt he even noticed I had it on. I kept the conversation light, asking if he had favorite Kyoto spots, or if we could see the geishas, maybe take a boat down the canal. "I'll be busy," he said. "It's your trip. Just enjoy it." I nodded, pretending it was okay, pretending I didn't feel like a background character in my own celebration. At one point, I reached across the table and asked if he'd printed anything out. Hotel confirmation, maybe a schedule. "My phone wasn't reliable lately." "Everything's digital, Mom," he said, not even looking up. "Relax, relax." The word echoed. I'd heard it before, so many times, usually right before something went wrong. When he forgot to pick me up from the hospital, when he overdrafted my account by accident, when he canceled Mother's Day brunch because he got stuck at work but posted photos at a golf course the next morning. I should have asked more questions, should have pressed for details. But if you're a mother, you know how that goes. You don't want to nag. You don't want to seem ungrateful. You tell yourself, maybe it's just you overthinking again. You tell yourself, silence is trust. And yet, part of me was screaming. Have you ever had that moment when your gut knows something your heart doesn't want to accept? Let me ask you this. If your child acted cold, distant, rushed through your birthday like a to-do list, would you speak up? Or would you do what I did and smile through it, praying you were just being sensitive? Let me know in the comments because I still wonder, was it love that made me quiet or fear of hearing the truth? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept pacing, opening and closing drawers. I packed and repacked my suitcase. I checked my passport 3 times even though I knew it was there. I set my alarm early. Too early. I just needed the morning to come. When Ethan finally knocked, I met him outside with my suitcase already zipped. He didn't say, "Happy birthday." He just opened the trunk, loaded the bag, and got in the car. We drove in silence. At the gate, I turned to say thank you, to say I loved him, to say this trip meant everything. But he was already pulling away, window rolled up, eyes back on his phone. I stood there for a long time, even after he was gone, wondering if maybe I'd done something wrong. Had I overstepped? Asked for too much? Expected more than he could give? But deep down, I knew the truth. I hadn't asked for anything. All I'd ever done was give. And somehow giving had made me disposable. When I stepped off the plane in Kyoto, the air felt different. Warm, sweet, almost like spring itself had been bottled and uncorked just for me. I remember smiling to myself. Despite everything, the awkward goodbye, the silence, I told myself maybe this was the turning point. Maybe once Ethan joined me tomorrow, things would feel right again. But that feeling didn't last long. The airport was clean and bright, buzzing with travelers, speaking in languages I didn't understand. I followed the signs toward baggage claim, rolling my carry-on, clutching my purse close. I took out my phone to check the hotel confirmation Ethan said he'd emailed me. The screen flickered, 70% battery when I left Chicago. Now it blinked red, 2%. I swallowed the unease. I'd printed nothing. Ethan said I didn't need to. He had everything handled. Just enjoy the trip, he said. My phone died before I could even open the email app. I stood there frozen for a second, unsure where to go. I checked my wallet. Passport. Check. 1 credit card. The one Ethan said he'd activated for international use. No cash. The $200 I always kept tucked behind my ID was gone. I must have left it behind in my rush. No hotel info. No address. No maps. I sat on a bench near the taxi line and tried to breathe. No panic, I told myself. You've traveled before. You're smart. You can figure this out. You raised a child, survived a failing marriage, outlived a husband, and worked double shifts through flu seasons and back pain and Christmases alone. This is just a bump. I dug into my carry-on, hoping I had scribbled something down. I found the boarding pass. On the back, I had jotted a name Ethan had casually mentioned. Hotel Ryumaikan, Kyoto. I waved down a taxi, pointed to the writing, and the driver nodded. We drove for about 20 minutes through quiet streets lined with paper lanterns and narrow shops. The city was beautiful, like something out of a postcard, but I was too tense to appreciate it. I clutched my bag the whole ride, telling myself everything would be okay once I got to the hotel, but it wasn't. At the front desk, the young woman behind the counter tilted her head politely when I gave her my name. She typed into the computer, then again, slower. "I'm sorry," she said in soft English. "No reservation." I blinked. "Try under Ethan Baines?" "He booked it." She checked again. Nothing. No email, no payment, no booking. She turned the screen toward me. My name wasn't there. That's when the panic began. I asked if she could call the airline to check my return flight info. Maybe there had been a mistake. She nodded, picked up the phone. I waited on a little velvet bench near the elevator, staring at my shoes, heart thudding in my chest like a trapped bird. She returned, face pale. "There is no return flight booked," she said quietly. I sat very still. No return flight. He hadn't just forgotten. He hadn't overlooked something. This wasn't a mistake. Ethan had left me here, on purpose. A birthday gift that doubled as a goodbye. The blood drained from my face. My hands trembled. The bellhop behind the counter looked over with concern, but I shook my head. "I'm fine," I whispered, but I wasn't. I walked out of the hotel, sat on a nearby bench near a row of cypress trees, and stared at nothing. My mind was empty and full at the same time. Every memory I had of Ethan played on a loop. His first fever, his school plays, the peanut butter sandwiches I used to cut in little triangles because he said rectangles made him feel sad. And then came the memories I didn't want. Him missing birthdays, snapping at me when I reminded him to take his vitamins, rolling his eyes when I asked about his work. The way he once said, "You worry too much, Mom." It's exhausting. Exhausting. That's what I had become. Not someone who raised him, sacrificed for him, believed in him when no one else did, but a burden. I thought about the sapphire brooch I pawned to pay for his SAT tutor, the wedding ring I sold to cover his first semester when his loan didn't come through, the second job I picked up at the hospital gift shop so he could have spending money in college, the years I went without just so he could have more. And now? Now I was disposable. He hadn't even waited a day before making me vanish. My throat tightened as a new thought took root. Maybe he hadn't wanted me to come back. Maybe he hoped I'd get so lost in translation, in foreign laws and systems, that I'd end up forgotten, institutionalized, silenced, a problem solved. I wrapped my arms around myself, not because I was cold, but because I needed to hold something beneath being anything and together. And still, through all the pain, one feeling rose higher than the rest. Shame. Not for what he did, but for how long I had let myself believe it was love. I found the little cafe by accident. My feet were sore from walking, and my head throbbed with hunger and confusion. Tucked between two bookstores on a quiet Kyoto side street, its awning was faded, but the warmth inside was the first thing in hours that didn't make me feel invisible. The barista didn't speak much English, but he pointed kindly to a worn menu and led me to a corner table. They had Wi-Fi. I nearly cried. He handed me a charger and an old tablet. It took a few tries, but I logged into my Gmail account. I hadn't used it in ages, only kept it for old photos and online receipts. But the moment I was back in, I started digging. I searched for the hotel email Ethan swore he'd sent. Nothing. No confirmation. No bookings. I checked my bank account. Blocked. I checked my credit card. Declined. And then I opened my inbox. There at the top was a thread I wasn't supposed to see. Ethan had accidentally forwarded a chain from my niece Claire to me weeks ago. I clicked, thinking it was something harmless, but what I saw knocked the breath out of me. "He's starting to worry," Claire had written. "She forgot to pay taxes last year and repeats herself a lot. Maybe it's time someone stepped in." Ethan replied, "Exactly. I've been looking into power of attorney. I think she's slipping, but I want to handle it quietly." Another message, this time to my brother-in-law, Walter. She booked 2 dentist appointments in the same week. Totally forgot. That's not normal. I sat there, blinking at the screen, heart pounding. I hadn't forgotten anything. I'd made a second appointment because the hygienist was booked out for 6 months. The taxes, that was an IRS mistake. I had the corrected form in a drawer back home. He wasn't concerned. He was preparing a case. Stroke by stroke, he was painting me as unstable, not because I needed help, but because he needed control. Power of attorney, access to my house, my finances, my name. He wasn't waiting for me to grow old or unwell. He was writing the ending early. And the trip? The trip was a setup. He created the very crisis he needed to prove I was incompetent. No phone, no money, no way home. Then he could swoop in, rescue me, and claim legal guardianship. I wasn't supposed to survive this alone. I wasn't supposed to figure it out. I was supposed to fail. I leaned back in my chair, the smell of espresso suddenly too strong, too bitter. My hands trembled, not from fear this time, but rage. Pure, steady rage. I had spent a lifetime protecting this boy. From bullies, from his own bad choices, from the world. And now he was trying to erase me. Not just move me into a home or close my bank account, but rewrite who I was. A confused, dependent, failing old woman. He wanted the house, the lake property I'd worked 30 years to pay off. He wanted the insurance I never told him about, the quiet savings account I built from leftover shifts and coupon clipping. He wanted it all, and he thought he could get it. Because I was quiet. Because I'd always said yes. Because I didn't fight back. But something shifted in me, sitting at that cafe table with a cracked tablet and a lukewarm cup of tea. Something old and buried came up like fire through frozen ground. I remembered what I was before I became a mother. A woman who'd survived a marriage full of silence. A woman who rebuilt her life after her husband passed. A woman who never once asked for recognition, but deserved it all the same. I wasn't done. I wasn't gone. And I wasn't going to let him write me out. I opened a new email and typed in one name, Ray Donovan, my old lawyer, the one who handled James's estate, the one who looked me in the eye at the will reading and said, "You're the kind of client I never worry about because you know what you want." Subject line, prepare power of attorney challenge. Immediate action, body returning ASAP, Ethan's building false claims, need injunctions in place. Call me. I hit send, and for the first time in days, I felt my spine straighten. My hands still trembled. My chest still ached. But there was something inside me that steadied. He thought he'd buried me in a foreign country, but I'd found something better than a way out. I'd found the truth, and I planned to bring it home. Ray Donovan didn't ask a single question when he picked up the phone. I said, "It's me," and he said, "Dorothy. I was wondering when you'd call." It was 3:20 a.m., his time in Minneapolis, but he was already pouring coffee and pulling files. That's the kind of man he was. He asked where I was, if I was safe, what I knew so far. I told him everything, slowly, clearly, even the parts that made me feel stupid, like not printing my itinerary or letting Ethan handle all the details. Ray didn't flinch. "You're not stupid, Monta," he said firmly. "You were being a mother. He was being a manipulator." I hadn't cried since the hotel, but that line cracked something loose. I asked him what we could do. "Plenty," he said. Ray worked fast. Within hours, he filed an emergency motion with the county court to freeze all financial activity involving my estate. He also sent a letter to Ethan's attorney of record, warning him that any attempt to access my bank accounts, property deeds, or medical files would be considered preemptive fraud. It wasn't revenge. It was defense. Ray told me to stay put, to conserve my energy, and to keep documenting everything. He'd handle the fire at home. I just needed to get on the next plane back and be ready to stand tall. "I've seen sons like him before," Ray said. "They always underestimate the woman they came from." I hung up and stared at the chipped ceramic cup on the cafe table. The steam had faded, but I hadn't. I was still here. My fingers found steadiness I hadn't felt in days. Later that afternoon, I called Martha. She answered on the first ring. "Dorothy," she breathed. "Where are you? Are you okay?" "I'm all right," I said, "but I need you to do a few things for me." I gave her a list. Go to the house, see if anything had been moved. Look for mail from any attorneys or real estate brokers. Call the gardener. Ask if anyone's been walking the perimeter. And most importantly, water the roses. "Martha," I added, "I'm coming home, but not the same way I left." There was silence on the other end. Then, steady as always, she said, "I never thought I'd say this, but Ethan doesn't know who he's dealing with." Neither did I realized, because I'd forgotten who I was. I wasn't the woman who sat quietly in the back pew anymore. I wasn't the mother who kept excusing silence, who accepted being treated like an old coat in the closet. I was the woman who raised a son while working night shifts and balancing a checkbook down to the last penny. I was the one who clipped coupons, pored over insurance plans, and made a dollar stretch like it had magic. I was the one who buried a husband and built a life again, alone. And now, I was building something else. A line, a boundary, not out of spite, but out of survival. I booked my flight for the next morning, a one-stop journey through Seoul, then straight to Minneapolis. The airline had one seat left. I took it without hesitation. The barista at the cafe helped me call a taxi. He didn't speak much English, but when I told him home, he smiled kindly and bowed. That night, I stayed in a tiny hostel run by an elderly couple who barely spoke English, but who gave me hot tea and rice porridge and a quilted blanket that reminded me of home. The woman pressed her hand gently to mine as I checked in, and something about the kindness in her eyes made me feel like I was being stitched back together. I slept for 9 straight hours. When I woke, the sun was already up, and for the first time in over a week, I didn't feel lost. I brushed my hair, put on my earrings, and tied my scarf just right. I looked in the mirror and said out loud, "Let's go." The flight was long and full of turbulence, but it didn't rattle me. What shook me was the feeling of momentum, like my body finally remembered what it meant to move towards something instead of away from it. I didn't eat much on the plane, just sipped water and read through every document Ray had emailed me. He included a short note. "Stand tall. You're not asking for your life back. You're claiming it." As the flight descended into Minneapolis, I stared out the window and saw the frozen lake I'd lived beside for nearly 4 decades. It looked different now, not just colder, but quieter, like it had been waiting for me. At baggage claim, I didn't cry. I didn't rush. I simply stood up, straightened my coat, and walked out like a woman with nothing to prove and everything to protect. The snow was still fresh on the ground when my taxi pulled into my neighborhood. I hadn't seen it in 2 weeks, but it felt like years. The street looked the same, quiet, suburban, trimmed hedges and lazy mailboxes. But my house had changed. It wasn't the color or the shutters or the wreath on the door. It was the lights. Bright white LEDs had replaced my warm yellow porch bulbs, the ones I always kept soft, glowing, like a whisper saying, "Someone's home." That glow was gone. As we neared the driveway, I saw it. Cars, 3 of them. One was Ethan's silver sedan, parked crooked, like he always did when he thought rules didn't apply. The other 2 were rentals, newer, sleeker, out-of-state plates. My stomach tightened. He wasn't just staying there. He was entertaining. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror. "This the place?" I nodded. "Yes, this is mine." I stepped out slowly, feeling the frozen gravel under my boots, my fingers tightening around the handle of my suitcase. My lawyer, Ray, had asked me to wait until morning. "Let me file everything first." "Ah, no," he said. "Let the courts work in your favor." But I knew my timing was perfect, because through the front window, I saw Ethan raise a glass of champagne. The living room, my living room, was lit up like a showroom. And in the center, surrounded by 2 well-dressed strangers and a notary I didn't recognize, was my son, laughing, smiling, celebrating. He held a manila folder and waved it like a flag. "It's all wrapped up," I heard him say. "Signed, sealed, delivered. She's in Japan, completely out of the loop." One of the women leaned forward. "You're sure she's not coming back?" Ethan laughed. "Come on, she could barely keep track of her doctor appointments. She thinks this trip was her idea." That was it. I'd seen enough. "Now let me ask you something. If you walked up to your own front door and saw your child celebrating your erasure, what would you do? Would you bang the door down? Would you scream? Or would you do what I did and walk in like you never left? Let me know in the comments because I know some of you have been in that spot. Maybe not this exact one, but close enough to taste the same kind of betrayal. I opened the front door. No knocking, no hesitation. Just me, standing in the frame, letting the heat from the house hit my cheeks like a slap. The room went silent. Glasses stopped mid-air. Eyes froze. Ethan's mouth fell open. He dropped the folder. "Mom?" I stepped in fully, shut the door behind me, and let my suitcase rest by my feet. I looked around the room. My furniture, my rugs, the lamp James and I bought on our 20th anniversary. All of it being used as stage props in a play I was never meant to see. "Didn't expect me so soon, did you?" I said, voice low. Ethan stammered. I thought you were still in Kyoto." "I was," I said, "and now I'm not." Ray appeared behind me. "I'm right on cue, holding a thick folder of papers." "Mr. Ethan Baines," he said calmly, "you are hereby served emergency injunction, restraining order, asset freeze, and revocation of any pending power of attorney filings." One of the men in the room stood quickly. "I think we should leave." "Oui, c'est. Yes, yes." I watched them gather their bags, muttering apologies, looking anywhere but at me. And Ethan? He stood in the middle of it all, handsome. No champagne now, no grin, just a pale face and twitching hands. "Why are you doing this?" he finally whispered. I tilted my head. "You mean protecting what's mine?" He looked like a child again, not the grown man who planned my exile. Just a boy caught red-handed, shocked that his mother wasn't as disposable as he'd hoped. I stepped past him, walked into the kitchen, and ran my hand along the countertop. Still smooth, still mine. Then I turned back and said, "You can leave now." He didn't move. Ray stepped forward. "You no longer have legal residence here. Any refusal to vacate will be considered trespassing." Ethan looked at me one last time. "You'll regret this." I met his eyes. "No, you will." He grabbed his coat and walked out, slamming the door behind him. And just like that, the silence returned. But this time, it wasn't lonely. It was peace. I picked up the glass he'd left behind and dumped the champagne into the sink. I wiped down the counter, set the thermostat to my usual 70, and turned the porch light back to soft yellow. Then I sat down in my chair, closed my eyes, and breathed. I was home. The morning after I took back my house, I woke to a quiet I hadn't felt in years. Not the silence of being ignored or forgotten, the kind that used to settle in around me like fog, but the kind that hummed with clarity. I made a pot of coffee, the real kind, not the watered-down hotel stuff I'd grown used to. I drank it slowly, sitting at the kitchen table Ethan once used to do homework on. My fingers traced the small etchings he'd carved when he was 8. A stick figure, a sun, the letter E. He used to call this place our home. Somewhere along the way, that became his house. Not anymore. Ray arrived around 9 a.m., dressed in his usual navy suit, holding a manila folder thicker than the phone book. He set it on the counter, poured himself a cup of coffee without asking. We had that kind of history. And said, "Today, we draw the line." I nodded. We didn't need a speech. We just needed signatures. Together, we reviewed every document: emergency order to revoke Ethan's temporary financial access, property protections filed with the county recorder, a revised will removing Ethan entirely, a durable power of attorney assigned to my niece, Claire. When we reached the last page, Ray handed me a pen. I held it for a moment, breathing in the weight of everything it symbolized. Then I signed, slowly, firmly. My name, Dorothy Baines, written in ink, not fear. "Is it enough?" I asked quietly. Ray looked at me with something close to pride. It's more than enough. You've got your voice back. The courthouse was quiet when we arrived. Just a few people waiting for early hearings. Nothing dramatic. No slamming gavels or echoing verdicts. Just paperwork, quiet steps, and the hum of printers churning out the truth. Ethan was already there. He sat on a bench outside the courtroom, dressed like a man and pretending not to be nervous. He stood when he saw me, forced a smile. "Mom, can we talk?" I looked him in the eye, not as a mother, not as a victim, as a woman who had finally stopped explaining herself. "No." He blinked. "Just 5 minutes." I turned away and entered the courtroom without another word. The hearing was brief. Ray presented the case with clean facts. No theatrics. Just dates, documents, patterns, all building the picture Ethan had tried to draw of me. Forgetful, unstable, lost. The judge looked over the petition for power of attorney Ethan had filed 2 days after I landed in Kyoto. She raised an eyebrow. "No medical documentation? No physician recommendation?" she asked. Ethan's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. We believed there was enough anecdotal concern to act in good faith." "Jessie," the judge didn't buy it. She struck down the petition within 15 minutes, citing lack of evidence, signs of coercion and abuse of process. She signed the restraining order renewal immediately after. Outside the courtroom, Ethan approached again. His face had changed. Not angry, not apologetic, just hollow. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. I looked at him for what felt like the first time in years, past the adult exterior, past the guilt I'd worn like a second skin, and I said the truth. "Because this isn't yours to claim." He flinched. "You're my mother." "I was," I said, "and I gave everything I had. My time, my home, my name. And you used it all to build a version of me that served your goals, not my dignity." He stood there, stunned. I kept going. "You don't get to erase me, Ethan. You don't get to rewrite my story to make yours easier." He tried to speak. I didn't let him. "You made choices, and now I'm making mine." I walked past him, Ray beside me, the echo of my heels steady on the courthouse floor. Back in the car, I exhaled so deeply, it felt like I'd been holding my breath for 10 years. Ray didn't say anything for a long time. Then, softly, he muttered, "That boy just ran into a wall he never thought you'd build." I looked out the window at the city I'd lived in for 4 decades. The courthouse. The cafe on the corner where James once proposed. The school Ethan used to run toward after class. So many memories. So much love. But now I finally understood. Love without boundaries isn't love. It's erasure. It didn't take long for the news to spread. A small town like ours doesn't let much stay secret, especially when it involves court orders, family betrayal, and the kind of quiet scandal that's just juicy enough to discuss a book club, but painful enough to lower voices when my name comes up. I didn't have to say a word. People started asking questions on their own. It began with Martha, of course. She was the kind of neighbor who knew everything 3 minutes before it happened. She hadn't spoken a single word to Ethan since that day I called her from Japan. So when she ran into Susan Phelps at the post office, the same Susan whose daughter used to date Ethan in high school, she let it slip. Just once. Dorothy's back. She handled things. By the next day, Susan's daughter had posted something vague on Facebook. Some people don't realize who they're messing with until the paperwork shows up. No names, no context. But everyone knew. And then came the emails. 3 women from church reached out privately. One had noticed Ethan clearing out my china cabinet a week before I returned. Another remembered him mentioning how his mother was getting a little too tired to handle finances anymore. And the third, bless her soul, admitted she'd been invited to a small gathering at my home while I was supposedly on an extended retreat. And they all apologized. Not for what they did, but for what they didn't see. And I understood, because for years I didn't see it either. I didn't see how slowly Ethan had been reshaping my image in the world's eyes, how subtly he'd been preparing everyone to doubt me. It wasn't just gaslighting, it was social groundwork, a kind of emotional laundering, turning strong into controlling, attentive into overbearing, independent into the confused. But now people were remembering. Not just what he said, but who I'd always been. When the church's community bulletin came out, my name was listed again under the widow's circle with a note, "Welcome back, Dorothy." No fanfare, no pity, just a line that told me I wasn't invisible anymore. What hit harder was what wasn't said about Ethan. He showed up at Sunday service the following week alone, sat 2 pews back from his usual spot. No one turned him away. But no one greeted him either. No handshake, no smile. Just polite nods and cool glances. Not cruel, just, hey, cold. I didn't attend that service. I didn't need to. Martha told me everything. He sat there like a stranger in his own house, she said. People didn't shun him. They just didn't see him anymore. I nodded. That was enough. Later that week, I went to the grocery store. The same store where the cashier used to ask, "How's your son?" Every time I bought orange juice, because Ethan loved it as a boy. This time, she scanned my items, looked up and said, "You look good, Dorothy. Real good." It was the way she said it, like I had stepped out of a fog, like she finally saw me again, not as someone's mother, but as someone who survived. And in that moment, standing in the frozen aisle with a loaf of rye bread and a bag of decaf, I felt something deeper than victory. I felt restoration, not revenge, not satisfaction, just the quiet return of what was mine, my place, my dignity, my name. One afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address. The handwriting on the envelope was shaky, but familiar. Inside was a short note. "Mom, you made your point. I didn't think it would get this far. I guess I underestimated you. I hope someday you'll forgive me. Ethan." I folded the paper once, placed it in a drawer I hadn't opened in years, and went outside to water the roses. They'd started blooming again, brighter than I remembered. Funny how things grow when you stop begging them to. The roses came in fuller that year. I don't know if it was the fertilizer Martha swore by, or just the timing of things. How sometimes, when a storm passes, even the ground sighs and begins again. I stood out there most mornings, just me, my gloves, and the pruning shears James gave me on our last anniversary. The peace didn't come all at once. It came in layers, quiet ones. At first, I still jumped when the phone rang, still braced when the mail arrived, still hesitated before logging into my bank account. But day by day, the fear softened, the edge dulled, and in its place grew something sturdier, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. Not the loud kind, not the throw it in their face kind, just the kind where you wake up and realize, I don't owe anyone my silence anymore. I signed up for a watercolor class at the senior center, something small, Tuesdays at 10. The first day, I almost didn't go. I worried people would whisper. I worried someone would bring up Ethan, but they didn't. They just smiled, handed me a brush and said, "Glad you made it." I hadn't painted in decades. Turns out, I still remembered how to blend blues. There's a stillness that comes when you create something just for yourself, not for praise, not to prove a point, just because your hands need to move and your heart needs to rest. And funny enough, one of the women in class, a soft-spoken widow named Irene, asked me halfway through, "You live by the lake, don't you?" I nodded. She smiled. "I always thought that porch light of yours looked warm." Warm. The word landed harder than it should have because for so long, I thought warmth meant letting everyone in, even the ones who chipped away at me. But now I knew better. Warmth wasn't about being available. It was about being alive. even when no one's watching. A few weeks later, I hosted a book club at my house, first time in years. I set out lemon bars, made fresh tea, and dusted the shelves. I didn't try to impress anyone. I didn't over-explain anything. And when someone asked, "So where's Ethan these days?" I simply said, "He's doing his own thing." And we moved on. No gasps, no gossip. Just grace. That night, after everyone left, I sat on the porch with a blanket and looked out at the lake. The reflection of the moon danced on the water, and I thought, this is what healing looks like. Boring, beautiful, quiet. It doesn't shout. It doesn't perform. It just shows up and stays. Let me ask you something. Have you ever rebuilt your life without making noise? Just slowly, one tiny act of courage at a time. Getting out of bed, saying no without guilt, making soup for yourself on a Tuesday night because you deserve flavor. If you have, leave a comment. Not for attention, but because someone else scrolling through might need to know they're not alone. That starting over doesn't require fireworks, just breath, just time. And maybe a lemon bar or two. Martha came by the next morning with cuttings from her garden. She looked around and said, "Feels different in here." "It is," I said. "Are you lonely?" she asked. I smiled. "No, not anymore." And I meant it, because once you stop chasing acknowledgement and start standing in your own stillness, loneliness changes. It becomes solitude, a place where your thoughts don't echo in pain, but hum in peace. I didn't miss Ethan. I missed the boy he used to be. But even that grief had grown quieter now, no longer sharp. Just a soft ache I carried, like an old song I used to hum, but don't need to sing anymore. I started volunteering on Thursdays, reading to kids at the library. Funny how they listen without judgment. They just want stories. They don't care where you've been, what your son said, or how many times your voice cracked trying to defend yourself. They just listen. And maybe that's the greatest gift of all, being heard. Not because you fight for space, but because you've stopped apologizing for taking it. It was late spring when Ethan came by. I was trimming the lavender by the fence, my gloves stained with soil, sun on my back, and that kind of breeze that only shows up in May. Just enough to remind you the world keeps moving, even if people don't. I didn't hear his car, just his voice. "Hi, Mom." I turned around, slowly, still holding my shears. He looked different. Not older, just smaller. Like life had humbled him in the places I never could. There was a weariness around his eyes I hadn't seen before. Not the result of stress, but of seeing himself clearly. He was holding a paper bag. "Thought I'd bring you lunch," he said. "That soup you used to like? The one with barley?" I didn't say anything. He stepped forward. "I know I should have called. I didn't think you'd answer anyway." He was right. I watched him set the bag down on the bench by the porch. He didn't try to hug me, didn't reach for anything, just stood there, like he knew the silence between us wasn't something you could fill with words. "I just wanted to say thank you," he finally said, "for letting me be born to someone better than I ever deserved." That stopped me. Not because it fixed anything, but because it was the first time he'd said something without expecting an answer. I nodded once. Just that. Then I turned back to the lavender. He didn't linger, didn't ask to come in, didn't ask for forgiveness. He just left the soup and walked back to his car. I didn't cry. I didn't chase him. I didn't replay his words all night like I used to. I just finished my trimming, washed my hands, and had a bowl of barley soup on the porch with my feet up, watching the sky soften into evening. You see, healing doesn't mean the story wraps up neatly. It means you no longer need it to. There's power in refusing to be pulled back into cycles. In knowing that just because someone shows up with better words doesn't mean you owe them anything. Sometimes growth is letting someone speak without needing to respond. Without anger. without softness either. Just presence. Ethan's visit didn't change my life, but it confirmed something I already knew. I had nothing left to prove. He can live with what he did, and I can live with what I've become. The next day, I took the leftover soup to Martha's. We had lunch in her backyard while her cat chased bugs in the tall grass. I told her what happened. She didn't interrupt, just listened like she always did. When I was done, she nodded and said, "You're stronger than most women I know." I smiled. I'm just tired of explaining myself. That night, I lit a candle in the kitchen window. Not for Ethan, not for James, not for anyone who left, but for the version of me that had stayed. Through silence, through humiliation, through betrayal. She deserved the light. I had the envelope ready for days before I dropped it off. A plain manila folder, sealed carefully. No sticky notes or dramatic instructions. Just my new will, notarized and witnessed, tucked inside. My lawyer, Ray, told me I didn't have to explain anything to anyone. "It's your estate, Dorothy," he said, "not a group decision." He was right. I walked into the law office like I was going to the grocery store. No makeup, no fancy shoes, just me. And years of knowing that gratitude should never have to be begged for. Ray's assistant greeted me with a soft smile, took the folder, and handed me a receipt. That was it. 5 minutes. A quiet undoing of everything Ethan thought was guaranteed. Because the house, the lakefront property he used to brag about inheriting, that's going to Claire, my niece, the one who visited even when she didn't need anything. The savings account? Split between the local library and the children's hospital. Places that had no idea how much they'd helped me stay sane over the years. And the trust fund? Left in the name of a girl named Marcy, the daughter of my former housekeeper, who once helped me shovel snow at 6 a.m. with bare hands and never asked for a dime more than she earned. I left Ethan nothing, not to punish him, but to finally stop rewarding his silence, his arrogance, his assumption that love was owed and not earned. I thought about adding a letter, something gentle, something fair. However, it dawned on me that the letter is the absence. One day he would open the will and discover a blank where his name ought to have been, and all would be revealed in that place. I wanted to leave it that way. It is considered harsh by some to leave someone against their choice. Building a life around individuals who never once inquired about your true well-being, however, seemed cruel to me. When your mother asked for assistance in arranging a flight, Cruel called her a burden. Cruel believed she was too far away to return, so he was standing in her living room sipping champagne. No, it wasn't unkind. This was lucidity. I reflected on how calm isn't always gentle as I sat on my porch that afternoon, with tea in hand and lavender flowering at my feet. It appears to be borders at times, like self-respect, the law, and sharp lines inked in ink. I reflected on the early years, when I used to whisper in Ethan's ear while he slept. You will realize the price of love one day, that perhaps he does at last now, or perhaps he won't. However, I no longer have to bear that load. And when I say, you are not cruel, I hope that someone who has been reading this for years, someone who has been questioning if they are cruel for ignoring others, for establishing boundaries, or for choosing to remain silent rather than beg, hears me. You're smart, and being wise frequently means leaving quietly and shutting the door when you go. As evening descends over Lake Minnetonka, I sway softly on my porch swing. The air is chilly but gentle, and the aroma of pine and flowering roses comes from the shore. The lamp beside the front entrance gleamed golden behind me, a beacon I had brought back after taking back all that was rightfully mine. Children's laughing floated up from the park in the distance, serving as a reminder that life continues, even when you believe it has stopped. My chest did not tremble for the first time in months. I let out a breath when the ground felt solid underfoot. While I was abroad, The rose garden, which had previously been neglected because to treachery, flourished. Martha took care of it while I was away, but since I got back, I had personally trimmed and nourished each plant. Now, as I watched the buds open, I saw more than just thorns and flowers. I witnessed my own transformation from broken to silently strong. Every flower served as a reminder of how something lovely may come from something that almost destroyed it. The velvety edge of a pale pink flower brushed my hand like an old friend when I reached out to touch it. On the little wicker table underneath my notebook was the final draft of my new journal entry. Simple lines rather than pages filled with grief or rage. What was taken from me does not determine who I am. What I have decided to preserve, my dignity, my tranquility, and my light, defines who I am. There, pen hovering, I stopped and considered Ethan. When I initially recovered my home, I anticipated rage. I discovered dull acceptance instead. In tales, revenge may be satisfying, but ultimately, self-respect is what heals. I didn't want him to be in pain. All I had to do was stand. I recalled the day I quietly revised my will to remove his name. That may be considered cruel by some, but I viewed it as clarity, releasing us from a story that none of us deserved. Punishment was not the purpose of such deed. Honoring those who genuinely cared was the goal. The people who never ceased seeing me were Claire, Marcy, the hospital kids, and the library where I volunteered. I discovered that severing links on paper had already released my heart by the time I had submitted the paperwork. I thought about what triumph meant in the silence of that porch. It is not the echo of gavel blows or the clatter of court battles. It's the quiet after the storm, the area where one may breathe fearlessly. Even when no one is looking, it's painting roses in watercolor class. It involves telling stories to laughing children who are unaware of your past. It's feeling thankful that you can while sipping chamomile tea. I added a final phrase while glancing down at the journal once again. My refusal to let go is due to love, not retaliation. I shut the lid, placed the pen next to it, and let the fading light to permeate my body. As the lantern light fluctuated, I realized it wasn't a simple light bulb. It was the light I had always kept for me. I turned off the lamp, got up, and proceeded to the porch's edge. The lawn continued to light while the home behind me faded into shadow. I had set up solar pegs to softly light the way to the street, each one signifying a step I walked back toward myself. I grinned, knowing that I would wake up to another day of my choosing, another opportunity to write, volunteer, tend to the garden, and just be. I put my palm over the first rose bush, leaned down, and muttered, "Thank you," before I went to bed. Not to any one person, but to the cosmos and the little girl I used to be who longed for broad spaces and solid roots. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is to remain silent, whether that means waking up and not calling the person who hurt us, preparing a warm meal for ourselves, or just choosing to continue when no one else is around. She survived storms that I could scarcely have imagined in the past, and I now live in the peace she fought for. This narrative was about a calm sort of reclaiming rather than vengeful, ferocious retaliation. I want to hear from you now. Have you ever been undervalued, ignored, or abandoned, and then had to rebuild your life piece by piece? Perhaps that happened after your kids stopped coming. Perhaps it was when someone you loved forgot how valuable you were, or when you were considered a burden. I see you, whatever your moment was. Even if nobody else saw it, you did something bold, even though I know it wasn't easy. I would appreciate it if you could relate one modest, silent act of bravery that you did to restore your dignity. You may have moved out. Perhaps you stopped taking certain calls. Perhaps you took up gardening once more. Post it in the comments, whatever it was, not to show pity, but to show those still in their storm that serenity is achievable. Your narrative is important.